Okay, so let's get started. So this is it, guys. Winter semester 2021 ethical issues, and there's obviously a lot to talk about. So what I want to do today is basically this. Okay, I want to have a sort of just a little discussion at the beginning. I want to enumerate some important ethical issues that we're facing today. I want to talk a little bit about ethics. I want to kind of define it, talk about where we're going to go a little bit. Then I do want to cover just a little bit of material, an idea from Lawrence Colburn. Lawrence Colburn is a psychologist interested in how we develop a sense of morality. And then we'll go over the course details logistically, where we're going to go and assignments and so on. Okay, so let's get started. There are a lot of, I wish it wasn't the case, okay? I wish it wasn't the case that we have so much to talk about, okay? I really wish that this would just be a sort of trivial class, that we would really have nothing to say because we would all be ethical and it would all be so obvious, and we would be on, you know, the right track as humanity. But there are a lot of things to talk about, okay? So hopefully you guys have that same feeling. So let's get started. Let's see if we can fire off some important ethical issues today. So if I were to ask you, let's say, what do you think are, let's say, the top 3 ethical issues today, okay, or whatever, the top 10. Give me some important ethical issues, and they can span on everything. They can be, you know, environmental, technological, you know, medical research, animal rights, you know, consumer issues, labor issues, issues about whatever, fashion, technology, internet, privacy. So who wants to fire some off? Okay, I already gave you a lot of umbrella terms there.
I may start with the homeless right, because of the story 2 days ago of the homeless man who died on the street. So I can say the homeless right.
Homelessness.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, so yeah, and that touches on a lot of, what you'll see is a lot of ethical issues, even though we want to try to speak about them in a sort of a contained way. A lot of ethical issues will touch upon a lot of other ethical issues. So, you know, you can talk about homelessness, okay? So you can talk about sort of wealth gap, opportunity, equal opportunity. You can also talk about fairness, you know what I mean? You can talk about fairness. You can make a sort of a contrast between different perspectives on capitalism and socialism, different social programs. You can talk about more broadly, if you don't want to talk about specific policies, you want to talk more in abstract terms, you can talk about, let's say, merit. You know, who merits what? Does this person merit this? Do they deserve this? You know, is this self-inflicted or is it not self-inflicted? Okay, very good. Anybody else?
Discrimination.
Discrimination, good. Also sufficiently broad. And then you can kind of unpack that. You know, you can talk about discrimination in what form. You can talk about, you know, racial issues. Racial issues, we're talking about Black Lives Matter. You can talk about pay gaps between men and women. You can talk about discrimination in the form of, you know, sort of salary decrease for pregnant women. There's that sort of the, you know, the kind of a pregnancy tax in a way. Discrimination against Aboriginal groups. You know, you could also get into talk about things like white privilege and so on. Okay, very important issue, definitely. Any others?
So, sir, is it like racism is a part of discrimination? Like, can we consider that?
I would group those together, definitely, yeah. You know, and then, you know, you get into even further associated issues. Let's say discrimination in the workplace, discrimination in hiring. You could talk about, let's say, you know, law enforcement, discriminating law enforcement. And then if you want to start talking about law enforcement, you can start talking about militarization of the police and so on. So you see that if you start to really understand an ethical issue, you start to understand its complexity, and you really start to understand that a lot of things are interconnected in a lot of very interesting ways. Okay. Anybody else got an ethical issue that they think is relevant today?
Abortion.
Abortion is still today, and has been like, let's say, it's kind of a strange word to use, but it's a classical ethical issue. Okay, abortion has been okay. I'll get to the chat in a second. Abortion is basically, if you open up any textbook in applied ethics or ethical issues in the past 5 decades, probably abortion is one of the sort of classic go-to ethical debates and dilemmas. It's still, it's still in play. Like in Ireland, they recently legalized abortion. I believe in Argentina, they recently legalized abortion like a matter of weeks ago or a few days ago. In Alabama, they're starting to, trying to question Roe versus Wade, going back on. So that's pretty interesting. That for some ethical issues that you thought were basically okay, it's settled. We're not going back there, and here we are again having these ethical debates. Okay, good. Another one in the chat is free speech by mainstream media. So that opens up. There's quite a few there. Okay, you can talk about free speech. You can talk about what is the role of corporations in mediating political discussion. You know what I mean? So this whole thing about Trump getting blocked on Facebook and Twitter. I'll go back to that one in a second. But you can talk about online privacy. You can talk about targeted advertisement and so on. You talk about what do we do with sort of these forms of radicalization that now, Facebook and these things, you talk about Cambridge Analytica, are means of sort of targeted propaganda. So, what do we do with this? So free speech, censorship. The other one that I had on my mind, which is slightly related, is if you can then get into the topic of sort of, journalism. Who gets to say what and when are they censored? So you can talk about censorship like Trump being censored. That's one form of censorship, but we can discuss it because Twitter really has no obligation to Trump. Twitter is not a publicly owned forum. Twitter is a private company, and they can decide whether or not somebody has violated their policies or not. It's unfortunate for us that corporations have become the default forum for conversation, so that it does seem that banning somebody on Twitter seems to basically affect the debate. And then this whole thing about Parler, banning Parler in a pretty substantial way, basically just like Amazon is like, boom, shut down the server. Like you guys, hardcore sort of right-wing radical shit doesn't have a forum, and now it's kind of back online. But I also think about, let's say, slightly related, if you think about Julian Assange, okay, releasing classified information through WikiLeaks. Should that be censored? Should that be allowed? You think about Edward Snowden, sort of being a whistleblower about the NSA, talking about our online, basically big data and data hoarding and so on. So censorship is very interesting. You can talk about, let's say, censorship like they have in China, or you can talk about this whole issue of free speech versus, the permission for anybody to say whatever they want. Should you give a fair platform to neo-Nazis? And a person in another class said the other day that, yeah, we're all for free speech until it starts to basically threaten the communal good. That's a little bit tricky, okay? Well, if we're talking about private corporations, why are restaurants closed if they're private? We'll get into that, okay? That's now we're getting into sort of health policies and the effectiveness of health policies, and this sort of lose-lose situation of trying to contain a pandemic and impacting a lot of small businesses, while simultaneously you look at, like, say, Amazon is making a killing because a lot of nobody's going to shop and everybody's ordering online. We'll probably touch upon that. Any other ethical issue that comes to mind?
I thought about ending life because for some patients now, they have to decide like who to live and who to give like ventilator or.
Oh yeah, okay, good. So that's a kind of a crazy ethical issue, is limited medical equipment. How do you decide? You have to do a sort of a calculation. It has to be a kind of a sort of a cold utilitarian calculation. Who gets life support and who doesn't get life support when the medical system is when the medical system is stressed. Hold on, what's going on here in the debate? I can explain. Okay, the ethical issue of billionaires. Let's say billionaires is not in and of itself an ethical issue, but you have to formulate it as an ethical issue. We could say the ethical issue would be, what are the sort of repercussions? What are the implications of a large wealth gap? And does that match our sense of justice in the distributive sense? Okay, does it make sense that an employee is going to make only so much and is going to struggle when the CEO of that company is making, let's say, 400 times or 500 times what that employee makes? I think that there is a debate to be had there, and we will have that debate. We'll talk about egalitarianism versus libertarianism, sort of capitalism to its furthest extreme versus socialism to its further extreme. We will talk about that, and you guys are all going to have a chance to present on ethical issues. Okay, so now we're kind of listing some ethical issues, and you guys can think about one that might interest you. And there are a lot of ethical issues. Okay, so let me just fire off a few, and then I have sort of one more question, and then I have some kind of broad comments to make. What else? Okay, so in relation to the last thing that we talked about, let's say you can talk about euthanasia. Okay, euthanasia is something that is now, we call it medical aid in dying. It's also called physician-assisted suicide. It's legal in Canada. In some places it's illegal. I was talking to a student last semester who was from Russia, an older student, and she said in Russia, we don't have euthanasia, nor do we have palliative care. You know what I mean? So it's like, not only can you choose to die, but even if you're not allowed to die, you have to stay alive. But guess what? They don't have morphine for you. So like, what's the point? And then we can talk about, these things are not like black and white, and these things are not, well, it's your opinion versus my opinion. We can make, this is the whole point of the class, is you can make a stronger argument. Okay, that I believe that there are around 80% of Canadians that are in favor of physician-assisted suicide. Okay, you talk about, let's say, the death penalty. And even that carries with it a lot of implications. If you start talking about the death penalty, you can end up talking about discrimination. You can talk about whether or not it actually is a deterrent to crime. You can talk about the potential of potentially, what you call a miscarriage of justice. You can potentially sentence somebody who's innocent, and you can potentially let somebody off the hook who's guilty. Okay, and when you add that to the death penalty, you get an ugly situation that people have died that have later been proven to be innocent. Okay, so let me just give you that exact, let's say, death penalty. You can be a lawyer who is opposed to the death penalty and make those arguments. You can say the death penalty disproportionately is given to minority groups in the United States. The death penalty does not deter crime if you analyze it statistically. With the death penalty, there's a possibility of basically killing somebody and never being able to redeem that. Okay, even if you sentence somebody to life without parole, there are people that have been jailed. There have been stories of people that have been jailed for 25 years, you know, and then they get exonerated of the crime. It sucks, but at least there's some form of retribution, you know, of justice. So that's an interesting argument if a sort of lawyer is making that argument. If, you know, if a redneck says, well, I'm for the death penalty because my dad is for the death penalty, and my daddy's dad is for the death penalty, and my great-granddad was the town hangman, okay? That's not an interesting argument, okay? It's not a matter of opinion. So that's kind of point number one. Okay, that's another interesting issue that's related. Punishment versus rehabilitative, okay? What is the role of a prison? You know, if I say, this prison is a good prison, what do you mean by good? You know what I mean? Is it good because it's punitive, or is it good because you're reforming the person? Okay, and then to what degree do you want to reform them? You know, do you want to lobotomize them? Do you want to do like Clockwork Orange? Okay, so just on the point that I was sort of making there was, this is a matter of your informed opinion. There may be, with regards to any given ethical issue, several potential legitimate, reasonable, well-informed opinions. And there may also be many wrong ideas, okay? Bad, ill-informed, stupid ideas, okay? So let's fire off a few more. You know, we talked about, you could talk about, let's say, cloning, genetic engineering, CRISPR technology, gene editing. You could talk about genetically modified foods. You could talk about testing on animals for pharmaceuticals, testing on animals for cosmetics. Testing on animals for pharmaceuticals versus testing on animals for cosmetics is a very important variable. It really changes how people's moral intuition will shift as, okay, it's permissible or it isn't. Factory farming of animals, okay? Factory farming of animals as being an impact on human health. Factory farming of animals, you know, meat consumption on human health. Factory farming of animals in terms of animal rights. Factory farming of animals in terms of impact on, you know, CO2 emissions and greenhouse gases. These are things that we need to think about, okay? And we'll talk about why. What else? You talk about artificial intelligence, you know, the potential dangers of artificial intelligence. You know, when you develop an artificial intelligence algorithm, a deep learning algorithm that ends up being discriminatory, you know, like an algorithm that's going to determine who gets parole in the United States and who doesn't get parole, ends up over time developing sort of racial biases, which is pretty interesting and pretty crazy. You can talk about what's going to happen when in 15 to 20 years, 50 or 60% of the workforce is expected to be laid off because of automation and robotics and artificial intelligence. What do we do then? Okay, if you don't have then people making money to consume the products that the machines are making. Okay, so we're living in very interesting times. You could talk about, you know, misinformation, targeted misinformation. It goes on and on and on, okay? There are issues with regards to society, politics, environment, technology, food, issues with food, issues with clothing, issues with, you know, biomedical research, issues with pandemics, you know. Where did this pandemic come from? And what were the contributing causes of it, okay? If you look at a lot of the outbreaks of infectious diseases, it seems to come from factory farming of animals and mistreatment of animals. Put, you know, so many pigs. How many pigs can we fit in, you know, in this area? Maximize it. And you're creating fertile ground for infectious disease. So these are all things that we need to think about. Okay, let me, if you were to say, what is the most important ethical issue today? What would you say it is? Let me see who can give me the what I believe is the right answer here. And how would you assess that? How would you assess what is the most important ethical issue today? You think about it in terms of impact, you know. Let's say you can think about it in terms of worst case apocalyptic scenarios. This is, let me just bear with me for the next few minutes. It's going to get a little bit bleak. It's going to be a little bit bleak for the next few minutes. And then I promise I'm going to make it a little bit more positive. Okay. Let's just cut to the chase. Who has heard of the Doomsday Clock? Let me see here. Put a thumb up or something in the comments, or let's see who's nodding. Doomsday Clock. Have you heard about it? Yes or no? No? Neither nodding nor not? Okay. Nobody wants to help me out here, eh? Good start. Okay. Has anybody heard of the Doomsday Clock? No. Yes or no? So what is the Doomsday Clock? The Doomsday Clock is, I'm a little bit upset that you guys haven't. Okay, so at least one person has heard of the Doomsday Clock. I'm a little upset that many of you haven't heard of it. Okay, it bothers me a little bit. So what is the Doomsday Clock? The Doomsday Clock is this basically symbolic representation, which is made by a group of scientists in Europe, which is called the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists. The Bulletin of Atomic Scientists is a group of scientists that every year or two, they basically track how close we are to a self-inflicted, man-made catastrophe that will potentially lead to widespread collapse of human civilization. Okay, that can potentially lead to the end of human civilization as we know it. Okay, if not the extinction of mankind. This Bulletin of Atomic Scientists, I believe it came around in the 1950s, and they were tracking the tensions during the Cold War, between United States and Russia, particularly, the development and the tensions regarding the prospect of a nuclear bomb and nuclear warfare. So that's actually on the list. They say that there are two main reasons. There are two very likely candidates that will bring about this catastrophic event. One of them is still nuclear war. Okay, we don't really think about that. Okay, and let's say if you're in the 50s and 60s, there would be drills in school about what to do if an atomic bomb was dropped. We don't really think about it, and in a way that's good. In a way it's bad, because we then sort of take it for granted. It's sort of kind of like a fantasy. We talk about it in the films, but we don't really entertain it as a real possibility. In a way, it's good, because we already have so much on our plate. We have a lot of other ethical issues to think about. So you sort of just cross your fingers and you hope that, a world leader isn't going to go crazy and use it. And you hope that one of these bombs is not going to be acquired by some terrorist organization, some non-state agent. The second factor, which they added, I don't know, I imagine a few years ago, is climate change, okay? And everything associated with climate change, and what appears to be a sort of unwillingness to truly address the issue of climate change and all that it implies, such as, what you call climate refugees, because you can look at, models that in 20 years, sea levels are going to rise by, whatever fraction of a meter. And in many cases, that means that where there were homes and highways, that's going to be underwater, okay? So if you look at the simulations around Sorel in Quebec, Highway 40 is going to be underwater. What are you going to do? You're going to, rebuild Highway 40 to go around now, to detour? If you look at South Beach, Miami is underwater, okay? What are you going to do? You're going to buy pumps to pump the water out, perpetually pumping the water back out? There is the potential for widespread crop failure, okay, and food shortages. Mass extinction, which we're currently seeing, mass extinction of animals. Okay, animals are dying off on a rate on this planet. This is what we call the Anthropocene, okay? The human-dominated era in the history of the world, and animals are dying off on this planet in a rate that they basically, used to die off when a massive asteroid would hit the planet, okay? So now, this Bulletin of Atomic Scientists has what they call the Doomsday Clock. The Doomsday Clock is a sort of representation of how close we are to basically screwing ourselves over. Seriously, okay? And the idea is, how close are we to midnight? Midnight is basically this catastrophic event, basically, that we can't recover, that we can't recover from. Would anybody like to take a stab at how close we are to midnight currently? So basically, every year or two, they adjust the minute hand, closer or further to midnight, okay? Anybody like to take a guess how close we are to midnight? 100 seconds to midnight is the answer, correct. 100 seconds, this is the closest we've ever been, okay? We were 2 minutes to midnight about 2 years ago, and then now we're under 2 minutes, okay? Usually it's been around 5 minutes to midnight, 10 minutes to midnight, 15 minutes to midnight. You know, during the 80s, there was a particular moment of sort of world peace after the fall of the Berlin Wall, this and that. And it was kind of, you know, we were kind of, it seemed to be looking good. Now, as a result of, climate change and the prospect of nuclear war, those things are very real. And let me say something positive in just a second. And there's also a third factor that they add. The third factor is now with basically targeted propaganda, what we saw with Cambridge Analytica, what we see with sort of, think tanks and these foundations that deliberately engage in sort of climate denialism and climate misinformation, lobbyists, lobby groups and so on, you know, for agricultural industries, for, you know, cattle industry, for oil industry, deliberately engaging in targeted misinformation. They say that this third factor is accelerating the first two, okay? Because now we don't even know what's true or false anymore, okay? Everybody is sort of set in their beliefs. We all suffer from confirmation bias. Confirmation bias is what? Confirmation bias is we generally have the tendency to look for evidence that already fits with what we think is true. We generally do that, okay? We generally like to ignore things that don't align up with our beliefs and our values. And we like to read things and look at things and, you know, follow people that tell us that we're right. We already have that naturally. Now, social media actually amplifies that because the algorithms, let's say YouTube and so on, Facebook, they're going to continue giving you what you want to see. So people on the right are going to, if you're pro-Trump, you're going to continue seeing more pro-Trump and you're going to continue consuming more pro-Trump material. If you're anti-Trump, it's going to continue giving you more anti-Trump stuff. And you're going to, and then so you can say, how do these, you know, you can't reconcile that chasm. Okay, you know, nuclear war. Yeah, I mean, biochemical warfare is definitely legitimate. Is definitely, is definitely also very catastrophic. But there are reasons why, and somebody can choose to explore it if they choose to. There are reasons why nuclear war, it might be even more catastrophic than, let's say, widespread biological warfare, because it actually, on a large enough scale, it actually alters, you know, the ecology in a way that even biological warfare wouldn't. Okay, but anyway, okay. So let me just kind of, what I want you to do here, okay, we're going to be looking at these ethical issues. I want you to, as I said, I want you to appreciate the complexity of a lot of these ethical issues. There are really two types of ethical issues. The first type of ethical issue is sort of the one that is a dilemma. So if you talk about something like, as I said, you know, legalization of drugs, should we or shouldn't we? And there's going to be people on either side. If you talk about, let's say, abortion or euthanasia, there's a moral debate there, okay? That's one type of ethical issue. Another type of ethical issue is one in which there really isn't an ethical debate. It's just that we are not informed about it enough, okay? So, you know, if you take something, let's say human trafficking, human trafficking is an ethical issue, not because we're going to debate whether it's good or bad. It's an ethical issue because we are sort of blind to it. So that if you choose to present on such an ethical issue, that would be sort of more informative and telling us what are the implications and problems of this. Okay. Let me say a few more things, and then I want to cover just a little bit of material, and then we'll talk about how we're going to proceed, logistically. But to truly understand an ethical issue, I think I'm cutting off a little bit here. To really understand an ethical issue is to understand that these things are not black and white. Okay. Things like abortion, things like euthanasia. It's not all or nothing. They're not black and white. Okay. Even legalization of drugs. It's not like, oh, well, if you legalize marijuana, then everything gets legalized. Anybody who makes a black and white, anybody who takes a black and white position on any ethical issue, is just ill-informed. Okay. So what I want you to also appreciate are the subtleties. If you're black and white on any given issue, whether it be even, let's say, the use of force by police, it's not black and white. Okay. Discrimination is not black and white. Okay. Poverty is not black and white. If anybody takes a black and white position on anything, they either have a stake in it. In other words, they have a kind of an agenda, or they're just ill-informed. Okay. So when you're presenting, I want you to appreciate that if with many ethical issues, there is a sort of spectrum. There are shades of gray. Okay. And you can say, look, I'm not all for it and I'm not all against it, but I'm kind of somewhere here. And here are the reasons why. Okay. If you guys want to talk about, weaponized, biological warfare and so on, we can talk about that in a specific presentation or later on. We'll talk about that later. Okay. So what else do I want to say? You also have to appreciate that an ethical issue changes over time. Okay. So if you have, let's say, a debate about abortion today, the debate about abortion today is not the same as the debate about abortion you would have had 30 years ago or 50 years ago. Okay, there are different reasons for that. The political climate changes, people's values change, and furthermore, the science also changes. So there are things now that we know about fetal development, so on, that simply wasn't the case. We didn't know it. Okay, so the landscape is also always changing. So we're all in on it together. Okay. You have to perpetually be interested and engaged and keep yourself informed. Let me just say this, okay? Please pay attention to this. I think it's very important. Some of you guys might come into this with this idea. Okay, here it is. Humanities, ethical issues. We're gonna have Mike Tilley, and Mike Tilley is gonna teach us the difference between right and wrong. Okay. That's simply not the case. Okay. We're all in the same boat. Okay, we're all trying to make sense perpetually every day of what makes sense, what doesn't make sense. There's a big conversation here going on here. Let's save it to the end. Okay, let's actually hear what you guys have to say. And it looks like this virus, germ, biological warfare is really taking a lot of my attention here. Okay, so it's not like, oh, here it's going to be a morality class. Mike Tilley's going to teach us that we have to be a good person, and he knows what it means to be a good person. No, it's not like that. Okay, we're trying to figure it out together. Okay, me and you, we're in the same boat. Okay. Now this is also what I want to say. This is very important. You might have this idea that. Okay, now on top of everything else that I have to do, I have school to attend, I have to go to work, I have to be a good daughter or a good son, I want to see my friends. I have so much on my plate now. And now on top of that, I also have to be this, ethical citizen and I have to think about things and have opinions and be informed. So that's actually the wrong way to look at it. Okay. That on top of all that, now I also have to be ethical, and I have to think about what's right and what's wrong. You know, I'm just trying to get through my life. I'm just trying to get through school. And hopefully I'm going to try to kind of sell you on this attitude. And it's the correct attitude. If you truly understand what it means to be ethical, you understand that it's not something on top of your plate. Additionally, to be an ethical person it's more of like a style, okay? It's a way of doing what you do. It shouldn't be, if when you truly understand it, it's not an additional burden, okay? It's a way of doing what you have to do. It's a way of being involved in life, you know, of taking on your obligations and your duties. And that's what we're going to get. We're going to get this idea, you know, we're going to get it with some of these ancient philosophers that we're going to see. We're going to get it with Immanuel Kant. We're going to get it throughout, okay? We're going to get it with Henry David Thoreau. This idea that once you truly understand what it means to be an ethical person, it's something that you do for its own sake, okay? You don't do it for the sake of. You don't do it, say, I'm a good person, I don't steal because I want to go to heaven. Or I don't steal because I'm afraid of getting caught, okay? You say, I don't lie, I don't steal because that's just who I am. I realize that there's value in that, and that's what I strive to be. So it's not something that is on top of your plate. It's a sort of style or manner in which you engage with the world, okay? And it's very liberating in a way. Once you truly get it, it's very freeing, because you are then autonomous. You're thinking for yourself. You're figuring out what makes sense to you, what doesn't make sense to you. You're figuring out what has value for me, okay? And you say, no, I'm not going to do this. I'm not going to. This is bullshit, you know. So there's something very liberating about it. It gives you a sense of power and, you know, autonomous courage. Okay. Any comments before I proceed here with just some notes, taking off on the last point that I just said? Anybody like to add anything? No? Okay, so let's just cover a little bit of material, and then we'll go over the assignments and stuff like that. Some kind of coronavirus origins are preoccupying the chat. Okay. Stick around and we'll talk about that after the class. So let's get into this. So this is what I want to start with, okay? Very simple idea, very interesting idea. More talking about, let's say, the psychology of morality. That's what we're talking about. And this is something that I want you to retain, okay? The slides will be provided in the document section on Leah. So these are the stages of moral development by this idea from Lawrence Kohlberg. Lawrence Kohlberg is an American developmental psychologist. He's interested in how children develop a sense of morality, okay? How throughout our life we acquire a sense of morality. Now, okay, let me say this before we get started. Morality, okay, thinking about morality requires sort of higher order thinking. It requires the development of the cerebral cortex, which is implied in sort of higher order thinking. That's why you can't expect animals and children, or somebody that has sort of brain damage to behave morally. There are reasons for that, okay? Because morality, in some sense, requires a degree of empathy. It requires that you're able to, put yourself in somebody else's shoes, potentially. That requires higher order thinking. It also requires that you're able to foresee the implications of your actions, okay? That's why in some cases, you're able to momentarily, hold on, wait here, this chat is really distracting me here. You guys need to just take it easy with the coronavirus chat, okay? And we'll talk about it afterwards because it seems to be preoccupying a few people. So please, let's just leave it after we've talked about the course outline. If you guys want to, we'll talk about it then. Just suspend this conversation for now because I would also like to be part of it. And I can't do two things at once, okay? So, you know, that's why the higher order thinking takes place in the brain. That's why, let's say, if you're drunk, you're acting impulsively, it opens up the potential to acting unethically because you're over-assessing, let's say, a short-term pleasure for what is required for, you know, more complex thinking, which is sort of higher, a better reward later on. Suspension of an immediate short-term gratification for a better reward later on. Okay, so I guess some of you guys are doing that here. Okay, you say, well, I'm going to attend this class. I'd rather be doing something else, but I'm going to attend this class because you've estimated that there is a long-term goal which is more beneficial to you. Okay, so these three stages: pre-conventional, conventional, and post-conventional. And the key word here is obviously conventional. Conventional is, what do you mean by conventional? Okay, sort of the normalized, the standard practices. So that's how a lot of people understand morality. Morality is just whatever the group or the culture says is right or wrong. Okay, so he talks about pre-conventional, conventional, and post-conventional. I want you to retain these. And so let's start with the pre-conventional stage. What we're describing here, very important, okay, is we're not describing what a person does. What we're describing is the thought process, okay? We're not describing the outward behavior of the person. We're describing the inner psychology of the person. What is the person's psychology? What is the person's motivation? Let me give you two examples, okay? Let's say somebody is giving money to charity. If you, let's say you have an athlete or a celebrity that's giving money to charity, on one hand, they might be giving money to charity if, let's say, it's conventional. At the conventional level, they would say, I'm giving money to charity because that's what my peers are doing. So I guess I should do the same, okay? Or I'm giving money to charity because, you know, I want to go to heaven. Because that's what my community says is the correct thing to do. So you wouldn't say that that person is a saint. You wouldn't say that that person is sincere. They're doing it simply because they're sort of following a trend, okay? At the pre-conventional level, that athlete or that celebrity would be giving money to charity because they realize, you know what, I really don't care about this charity, and I really don't care about the cause, but it's going to give me good publicity and good marketing, and that's really what I care about, okay? Is ultimately, it's the self is the end goal. And at the post-conventional level, the person is going to think in terms of more universal terms. So this celebrity or athlete is going to say, I'm going to give money to charity because I see what I regard as a sort of injustice. I'm in a position to address that injustice. And anybody who's in my position ought to do the same. Okay, something like along those lines. Let me give you another example. If you take, let's say, a doctor who is asked by their dying patient, you know, the dying patient says, just kill me. You know, I want to die, just kill me, you know. At the conventional level, suppose the doctor is in a country where physician-assisted suicide is illegal. The doctors are going to say, even though I empathize with this person, and even though I personally would like to kill them and get it over with because that's what they want, and that's what is in some sense, you know, the best relief of pain, I'm not going to do it because it's illegal. I'm not going to do it because I'm going to lose my, you know, my professional license. I'm not going to do it because I'm going to be shunned by my colleagues. That's very conventional. Okay, that would be the conventional level. At the pre-conventional level, the doctor would say something like, well, I'm not going to kill this person because what's in it for me? Okay, if anything, I'm going to go to jail. So never mind, you know, I'm not even going to begin to entertain the morality of it because I start my analysis with what's in it for me and it stops right there because I have nothing to gain by killing this person. That would be the pre-conventional level. The post-conventional person would say, it's against the law. I'm going to be shunned by my colleagues, but it's the right thing to do. And I'm compelled by what I regard is the right thing to do, is driving me more than anything else. Okay, so that's conventional, pre-conventional, post-conventional. Those are two examples. Okay, so what do we get at the pre-conventional level? You have basically, again, as I said, a child or an adult that hasn't developed properly, or an animal. Okay, you are motivated basically just by fear. Okay, so like a thief. Consider this: like a thief who wants to steal, but won't steal because he's afraid of getting caught. What you have there is not a good person. You have a scared thief. He's fundamentally a thief in terms of his psychology. He's just not willing to act on it. Okay. In other words, without those restraints and without the fear of punishment, he would very well be a thief. Okay. Slightly higher than this is basically what you get is the egoist, what you call the instrumental egoist. Look, we are all at these stages at different times in our life, at different times of the day. Okay. Ideally, you want to gravitate towards the post-conventional stage. You want to move away from the pre-conventional stage. Okay. If everybody was at the pre-conventional stage, society would basically collapse very quickly. Okay. We want to try to keep it together. So at the instrumental stage, like I said, somebody who's giving money to charity, not because they actually care, but because it's good publicity, it's good advertisement for their brand. Okay. The instrumental egoist. I'm going to do something which is regarded as good, only if it's even better for me. You know, it's always sort of tit for tat. Now, I want you to appreciate this. This is sort of now transitioning into the conventional stage, which I think is the most important stage to analyze. Okay, let me just put it this way. If you look at a lot of the ethical issues that we face today, we have this fantasy, okay? It's a fantasy that comes from, you know, Disney movies and stuff like that. This fantasy that there are evil bastards out there, you know, evil politicians or, you know, evil businessmen, billionaires, and you say, if we can get rid of them, somehow there's going to be a purifying white light that's going to, you know, wash over the kingdom and everything is going to be returned to harmony. That's simply not the case. There are some evil bastards out there, for sure. But if you look at the real damage that is done, this I want you to really appreciate. Just pay attention. If you look at the real damage that is done, it is done not by, oh, you know, shadow government and, you know, like Illuminati and this and that, conspiracy theory, you know, the evil elites. Sure, I'm not saying, you know, there are some people that have power that are psychopaths, okay? But if you look at the real damage that is done, if you look at the real important ethical issues, the cause is not them, the cause is all of us, okay? The real damage that is done by widespread conformist ignorance to stupid and dangerous patterns of behavior, okay? Ignorantly, blindly, in a conformist kind of way, going along with the status quo, going along with popular trends and opinions, even, and this is funny, even when it's not even in your best interest, you would be better off as an egoist than as a blind conformist. It would be in your actually be in your better interest. If you, in some cases, if you thought about what is in your best interest more than, well, what are people going to think of me? Okay. Let me just give you two simple examples. If you take, let's say, single use of plastic, you know, plastic pollution, single use plastic, which is itself not a black and white issue. Okay. If you're talking about single use plastic as, let's say, a styrofoam cup, then yeah, it's ridiculous. If we talk about single use plastic as being, you know, an IV tube in a hospital, then that makes sense, you know, or let's say a syringe or something like that. But let's say, if you talk about, let's say, plastic water bottles, we are a group of, how many people are in this class right now? There are 36 students. I would be willing to bet that one or two of you, in the comfort of your own home, have a plastic water bottle. You drink out of a plastic water bottle. okay? For whatever reason, okay? You've been sold on sort of marketing that it's cleaner or that it's healthier. It actually isn't, okay? There's more microplastic in your plastic water bottle than there is in the, you know, tap water in Canada. I mean, if you're skeptical, you know, you buy a filter and so on. But tap water in Canada, you guys don't realize how blessed you are. Once you put water in a bottle, it becomes a food article. And as a food article, it has to undergo virtually no regulatory testing. But when it comes out of your tap, which is actually the same water that they're selling back to you, but then it just sits in a hot warehouse to let the plastic leach in a little bit. When it comes out of your tap, it's considered, you know, a public utility and a public good, and it undergoes regulatory testing several times a week. Okay, does that mean that it's perfect? No, of course there are instances. You know, you talk about Flint, Michigan, high levels of lead, and so on. But you don't become a conspiracy theorist and say, oh, therefore it's all bad. The conspiracy theory actually works in the favor of Nestle and so on. Distrust in public utilities. Another example is, so what I'm trying to say there is, you drink out of a plastic water bottle, and basically at the conventional level, you say, well, it can't be that bad because everybody does it. You feel sort of permitted or entitled to do so because it's societally permitted or sanctioned. So now we're going to get to that. There are a lot of things that are societally permitted and sanctioned and legal that are arguably immoral. Okay, and we can think of a few. Let me give you another example. Nowhere in the world do they eat meat at the rate at which we eat meat. Okay, some people in North America eat meat and it's obscene. It's like, don't you see that you're obese and you have heart disease? You know, I was talking to my grandfather recently, and I said, when you were young, living in Italy, and my grandfather, when he was in Italy, was not poor. He was in a fairly well-off family. Okay, I said, how often would you eat meat? And he said, we would eat meat maybe, you know, once or twice a month. And you would kill the animal, and there would be an intrinsic relationship with that animal. Okay, now many people, okay, I would probably venture to say probably 90% of people in North America eat meat every day. Okay. Now it's not black or white again. It's not like, oh, I'm a fucking meat eater. Yeah, you know, or, oh no, I'm a vegan. There's a lot of people that are, you know, vegetarian, pescatarian, flexitarian. There are some people that eat meat, but they won't eat meat 2 days a week. There are some people that only eat meat 1 day a week. Okay. So stop, you know, people like cults. Okay, people say like, oh, vegans are too hardcore. Meat eaters are also hardcore. Don't worry about it. Okay, they're also very, very cultish in their like dogmatic beliefs. If so, that's again, it's like, you know, you eat meat because you say, well, it can't be that bad. Can't be that bad for the environment and so on. Everybody eats meat, so it can't be that bad. Okay, widespread conformist, ignorant practices that everybody just subscribes to. So here we go. Some of you guys are aware of Stanley Milgram. I think when I ask the question in class, usually I get a good number of hands that are aware of Stanley Milgram, the obedience experiment, the electroshock obedience experiment. Okay. So how does it go? Stanley Milgram was also a social psychologist. He was interested in basically understanding the psychology of soldiers, especially Nazis, during the Second World War. How can people who seem to be very ordinary people, very nice people, if you put them in the right context, they become mass murderers? How can this be? Okay. So he sets up an experiment. I believe he conducted this experiment in New York. He gets people from all walks of life. And the experiment is very, very simple. You're going to go in and you're going to be assigned as the teacher. And you're going to be told that this is a learning experiment, that it's a memory experiment. When the other guy gets a wrong answer, you're going to electrocute him. Okay, but it's rigged. It's all staged. You think that the experiment is about whether or not this guy is going to learn faster through getting electroshocks, but really the experiment is about you and how willing you are and how far you're willing to go. Okay. So if you're not familiar with this experiment, I think BBC made a short sort of documentary recap of it. I think it's like 10 or 15 minutes. They kind of redid the experiment. So what does it look like? You go in, you meet the experimenter. The experimenter says, okay, you're going to be the teacher and the other person is going to be the learner. The learner goes into the other room and is basically tied up to a device that's going to give him electroshocks. The person actually never receives an electroshock. The person is an actor, okay? And you're set up in front of this board that has, I believe, 15 increments, okay? And higher and higher voltages of electricity, ranging from, I think, like 10 volts to 450 volts. 450 volts is basically 3 times the current that's running through your walls that charges your devices. It's definitely lethal, okay? And the idea is it's the sort of memory game. When the person gives a wrong answer, you're going to electrocute them and then increasing, punishment, increasing punishment. But it's all scripted, okay? Person's never getting electrocuted. And at around the midway point, he starts to kind of complain. Says, that hurt, okay? And then it starts to become, I'm not comfortable with this, okay? And then it starts to say, let me out. I have a heart condition, let me out. It's all scripted. And the guy behind you says, the experiment must go on. Please, teacher, deliver the electric shock and move on to the next question. And now the other guy in the other room is basically screaming. He says, let me out, let me out, let me out. Okay, he gives a wrong answer, gets an electric shock. And this is the point. At one point, the guy in the other room becomes non-responsive. So he's either unconscious or he's dead, okay? And you look at the experimenter behind you, and the experimenter is the authority figure here. And the authority figure says, we must treat no answer as a wrong answer. Please deliver an electric shock and proceed. And then you end up going all the way to 450 volts. The question is, how many ordinary people, given these right circumstances, are willing to, they actually don't electrocute a perfect stranger because it's all rigged, but how many people would be willing to, given the right circumstances, actually kill a perfect stranger? And who knows the percentage? The percentage is like 67%. That's really scary, okay? So what does that mean? It means that you might think that you're a good person. So I mind my own business. I'm just passive. I'm a passive member of this society, okay? And in doing that, you might be participating in all kinds of dangerous things. Okay, or if you participate in an institution or a corporation, you say, I didn't personally do anything wrong, but you participate in a system that you knew what was going on, okay? Or if, let's say, you're a soldier. So this is what Stanley Milgram says. It's a little bit scary. And this is what we want to try to avoid, obviously. Ordinary people simply doing their jobs and without any particular hostility on their part can become agents in a terribly destructive process. Moreover, even when the destructive effects of their work become patently clear and they are asked to carry out actions incompatible with fundamental standards of morality, relatively few people have the resources needed to resist. Okay? That's pretty scary. Actions incompatible with their own fundamental standards of morality. Okay? So you basically, you go along. So that's pretty scary. Okay. Let's consider now the conventional stage. There are 2 things here, the sort of the conformity that we talked about. Let me just say this. Most people do just what most people do, okay? We are sort of herd animals in that way. What most people do is just what most people do, okay? A lot of people don't kind of think for themselves. So we do this because we want to fit in. We don't want to be the odd one out. We don't want to, a lot of people do not like being confrontational and challenging other people's opinions. There's a difference between, let's say, being woke and always being confrontational and, posturing yourself as being so virtuous and high and mighty. There's a difference between that and sort of respectfully challenging, prevailing ideas. So the idea of conformity here, you just do it because that's what people do. So I gave you the example of, let's say, water bottles. Slightly higher than this, and is you basically say, the laws are sacrosanct. If the laws say it's good, then it's good, okay? Now, hopefully you live in a good society with good laws, and generally that ends up being mostly true. But we can think of several examples. Let's say if you think about slavery, the slave trade, if you think about racially segregated United States, if you think about apartheid South Africa, if you think about even, let's say, pay gaps or pay gaps between men and women, That's a kind of, normalized thing. And for the most part, you're okay with it. But the point is, let's say if you live in racially segregated United States, merely going along with the status quo makes you a passive participant in an unjust system. So if you are post-conventional, you start to sort of question these things. You start to call attention to these things, okay? So just an example of that. Would somebody like to give me an example of something that is illegal but arguably moral, or something that is moral but illegal? I'm pretty sure we can fire off, 4 or 5. Anybody got one?
Or like gay rights in Saudi Arabia. Like
Okay,
it's
sure.
illegal there.
People have gay rights, gay marriage here in Canada. If you go to somewhere else, like Saudi Arabia, all of a sudden it's illegal. It's illegal to be, gay. That's okay. That's pretty okay. Any others? Shoplifting. Okay, this whole kind of Robin Hood idea. Shoplifting for the poor, shoplifting for a hungry child. You can make the case that, I'm stealing, but it's for the greater good. There could be an argument made there. Okay, yeah, especially if you have a case where, let's say, you have the king, which has all the wealth, and everybody else is suffering. You can say that in that case, it's moral to go against the prevailing power structure and steal from the tyrant, for sure. Okay, anybody else? In some cases, abortion is illegal, and you could make a strong argument that this is a woman's right. You can talk about legalization of drugs. Decriminalization of drugs, that can be an example either way. Euthanasia, you can say, the right to die is a right that somebody should have, and therefore in places where it's illegal, you would say it's illegal, but it's not moral. And that's what you get with people like Jack Kevorkian, okay, who was a physician from Detroit, who was basically, an advocate for physician-assisted suicide. He says it's illegal, but it's wrong that it's illegal. Okay, let me see. I think there's another one in the chat here. My computer's just a bit slow. Okay. Okay, so tax fraud, tax havens, some corporations, some rich people find ways of finding loopholes. Yes, they are legal loopholes. Is it fair? No, I don't think it's fair, in terms of everybody has to contribute to a society. Tax fraud, tax evasion. In some cases it's illegal. In some cases it's not illegal. You know what I mean? So they play with the wording and the loopholes. It's like other ones are like, it's illegal to cross a red light at 3 a.m. when there's nobody on the road. At 3 a.m, I cross a red light, not because I think I'm doing the morally right thing, but it's like, anyway, that's kind of a silly example, but okay, so that's good. Okay, so there is, you understand that morality is more than just what people think. In other words, it's more than just what is the societally established. It's not like, oh well, therefore there is no morality. There is no intrinsic morality, because morality is just relative and subjective. There is that dimension, but there are things that are just, when you talk about justice, you say, look, any sane person would agree. Some things are a little bit more, relative, but there are some things that are not just merely, well, it's just whatever society says it is, and going along with society therefore makes you, an angel. It's funny if you think about it, that you can be somewhere in the United States and be arrested with a little bit of marijuana, and you get a criminal record, and you cross into another state, or you cross into Canada, and you can buy that same marijuana legally. That's the kind of, it's kind of inconsistent. So okay, that's a good way to put it, sort of moral law versus societal law or state law. And that's actually a good way to put it, because you would say then that a post-conventional person is following a moral law, okay? They're following the voice of their conscience, which simply says, look, this doesn't make sense, okay? I can't go along with this and pretend that it's okay. So there's kind of three words to retain here with the post-conventional. This idea of, as you just said, a moral law. This idea of principles. You think in terms of principles, okay? What is justice? What is dignity? What is fairness? Okay, you think that's, so number one is principled thinking. So principled thinking implies number two. Number two is these things are universally applicable. Okay, what would work for not just me, but for everybody? Okay, in other words, are you acting in accordance with are you acting in accordance with your vision of how you would like the world to be? Where you would, we all have to be, we have to be realistic. You have to be realistic. Like, we're not going to be able to phase out fossil fuels tomorrow. You have to be realistic in that sense. But that doesn't mean you say there's nothing that can be done and that we're at the end of evolution. You still have to be a little bit idealistic and push towards things and values and ideas that you regard as beneficial, not only to you individually, but the collective, humanity. So principled thinking, universal thinking, and the last one I would say is this autonomous thinking. The autonomous thinking is a little bit dangerous. Okay, we're going to get that when we talk about civil disobedience and so on. Autonomous thinking means you figure it out for yourself. So it's beautiful to be a post-conventional person because, this is a little bit crazy to say, but you are in some sense above the law. In other words, let me try to put it this way. You don't need the law to tell you what to do because you would just do it automatically. You know what I mean? You don't need to be governed. You are your own moral authority. It's a very strong position to be in, okay? And you look forward to the day where, kind of the romantic anarchism, where you aspire that maybe there might be a day where humanity doesn't need to be governed. It can be sort of, through the development and evolution of our own consciousness, our own conscience, sorry, we just know what is right and what is wrong and what is going to work. Okay. So here we have this kind of problem. Actually, let me forego that. Let me not say. I'll take that. I'll talk about that later on in a different class. So what you get here is what you start to get with the post-conventional person is a sense of sort of dignity and self-worth. They would rather live accordance with their moral principles than in some cases, they'd rather do that than go to jail. They would rather forfeit some of their material comfort and livelihood, but live in accordance with the vision that they regard as being better, okay? So if you take this to, like, you can think about a lot of people here. I guess, you could put in, as I said, Edward Snowden, whistleblowers, people like whistleblowers. You're not pre-conventional because you're not interested in your own security. You're actually compromising your own security. And you're not conventional because you're actually breaking the rules. So people like Edward Snowden, Julian Assange, we're going to talk about a bunch of these people. I guess you could put kind of Greta Thunberg in there, stepping away from the status quo. And if you go to the furthest level, then you get martyrs, okay? And there's something I need to say here. So if you think about somebody like Nelson Mandela, Gandhi, Martin Luther King, their whole life is organized around their moral principle. Their moral self-worth becomes their priority. Not their livelihood, not their material wealth, not their comfort, but their vision of what is better becomes their driving priority. That's pretty strong. That's pretty hardcore, okay? So much so that in many cases, they actually end up dying as martyrs, okay? Which is pretty scary. But let me come back to that in a second. But what you get with these people at what he regards as the highest level is they become the sort of personification of a certain moral idea. So you can't think about Gandhi without thinking about passive resistance and nonviolence. Gandhi becomes synonymous. The person becomes synonymous with the principle. That's very, very powerful. Okay. But now you might say, and obviously, Say, well, I don't care to be that, you know. I wanna live a nice material life, nice and easy. I don't wanna trouble anybody. I don't even want to trouble the evil people. You know, and of course, you know, I can't expect you guys to be martyrs. But this is the point. You say, well, why would you want to do that? Why would you want to die for a cause? You can say these people are stupid, you know. Your only cause should be yourself. You should be an egoist, an individualist, and not bother about anything else. But let me make this point. In some sense, if you think about Gandhi, Martin Luther King, they found something that a lot of us don't find. They find this source of meaning and purpose and drive, which gives them a meaning for existing, which far exceeds the life of, you know, material wealth and comfort and the American dream. A lot of people get the American dream and they end up realizing that it's a little bit empty. So I guess, I don't know, that's a sales pitch, is they end up finding in their self-sacrifice, they end up living a life that's much more rich and full than, you know, the pre-conventional person who actually thinks that they're living the best life. Okay, so consider that. Let me see if there's anything that, let me just kind of recap that very quickly, okay? Pre-conventional stage, you would say that this person is not really thinking in any moral terms, okay? They are thinking in terms of avoidance of punishment, fear, self-interest. At the conventional stage, the person's sense of right is basically just appeal to popularity, okay? If so many people do it, it can't be that bad, okay? Or if so many people do it, it must be good, you know? Or whatever the law says, that's what it is. You can't ever imagine breaking the law, okay? When we talk about Henry David Thoreau is going to straight up say, you know, there are laws that don't make sense, so you should break those laws. And number 3 is the post-conventional individual, being autonomous, thinking for yourself, being your own moral authority. You don't have to be told what to do. You'll do it regardless. Seeing beyond norms, laws, and the authority of the group and or individuals. Okay, so that's pretty strong. So ideally, like I said, we're all of these. Okay, I like to very often I'm very conventional myself. I like to think that in some cases I am post-conventional, but if I'm stuck in traffic and I'm behind the wheel of my car, I become a pre-conventional animal. You know what I mean? So like you have to try to move towards the post-conventional. Any questions or comments with regards to that before we cover the logistics of the course? No? Hold on, let me just